This is How About That Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. With both objective and subjective perspectives, How About That Podcast is your place to hear about America's team. Now, here's Joseph Hoyt and Danny Morales.
Woo! All right, it's 12:30 on Friday morning. Thursday is done. The first night of the draft is done. I'm outside the Cowboys facility right now in my car recording this episode of How About That Podcast with the great Joey Aliberti. Joey, some stuff happened tonight, man.
I think that is safe to say. Things occurred on this Thursday night of the NFL draft.
There were some events, and to be honest with you, it kind of went how I expected for the Dallas Cowboys, but it still was a little bit shocking, if that makes any sense.
That makes perfect sense. But now I need to ask you what you mean. What was it that really shocked you?
Yeah, so let's kind of dive in immediately. This is going to be our instant reaction pod to the first night of the Dallas Cowboys. Danny Morales is a firefighter, so he's out doing, heroic stuff. Well, meanwhile, we're going to talk Cowboys. And the Cowboys selected an offensive tackle, which was not a surprise. There's a lot of deceit and shadowy whispers and red herrings thrown through draft season to try and confuse people about what teams are actually going to do. We saw a huge one with the 8th overall pick, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the Cowboys, it was never really a secret that they were either going to draft an interior offensive lineman or an offensive tackle. Those were the two biggest holes in the team. Tyron Smith was gone. They needed to find someone to replace him. The idea of moving Tyler Smith to Tyron Smith's spot at left tackle, while in theory made sense, never actually felt like an actuality. Even Mike McCarthy on Tuesday at the press conference for the pre-draft, he said, hey, if we had to line up today without any rookies right now, we couldn't line up an offensive line. Tyler Smith would be at left tackle, he said, or a left guard. And then he cut himself off. He's like, or tackle. So clearly he kind of let their plans even slip. And they were able to find that replacement at left tackle in a guy that ultimately has a ton of upside in Oklahoma offensive tackle Tyler Guyton, a favorite of Danny Morales, by the way, Joey. And not only were they able to get that replacement, they were able to also move off 24, go back to 29, trade with the Detroit Lions, and get an extra third-round pick in this draft, the number 73 overall pick. If you do the math, that's a pretty early third-round pick that Dallas now has. They'll have 4 picks in the top 100 as of right now. They still could have some movement again tomorrow. I think that there's some targets we're going to talk about later that I think they can go get, and they have that movement and that flexibility to do so. But ultimately, you got a left tackle, an athletic one with upside, and you're able to trade back not far enough where you lost that chance to do it. Joey, what's your instant reaction to what the Dallas Cowboys did by selecting Oklahoma offensive tackle Tyler Guyton?
My instant reaction was, this is going to make Danny really, really happy, which makes me partly happy for him, good guy, hero out there stopping fires. But at the same time, damn, why do you have to be right about that? He was in love with Tyler Guyton. Because going back to the draft crush, the chase for the rose, me and you were on the Armarius Mims side, who did, of course, go earlier than Tyler Guyton. But when it comes to the Cowboys, the Cowboys traded back and still got the guy who it seemed like it was either between him and Graham Barton this whole time, between who they were really targeting as this first-round draft pick. And I'm with you. I as we've talked about in the past, there was that really big gap between, what was it, the second round or early third round, and then the 5th round or something like that, where there was just a massive gap in picks. And I think that definitely solves that problem while not really sacrificing any talent in the first round pick.
I also think, too, I was a little surprised that they didn't trade back again. And the reason why I was surprised by that was because as the draft night goes, you start to kind of develop theories, right? And I started thinking, okay, maybe there actually is some semblance of an idea that they want to move Tyler Smith to left tackle. Because if they traded back again, then that might have been them saying, hey, guess what? We're going to do that plan. We're going to target a center or a guard as our first pick, maybe early on in the second round, where that could happen. Maybe a Jackson Powers Johnson or a Zach Frazier from West Virginia. And I think a key part of this entire night, and something I kind of want to capture, and forgive me for talking a little bit slow. It's been a long day. It's past midnight. We'll be back here in a few hours, basically, to talk to Tyler Guyton tomorrow. But one thing I think that I want to capture tonight is the idea that I think the draft board fell pretty ideally for Dallas, ultimately. 6 quarterbacks in the top 12. No defensive players at all until pick 15, when my guy, Liatu Latu, was selected. And, I told you. I told you. And then I thought the craziest part was the moment you realize, wait, not one defensive back has been taken. Terry and Arnold and Quinion Mitchell are still in the green room. And when that happened, and Darius Robinson was still kind of on the board, which apparently that's kind of the guy Jerry Jones pointed to in the press conference as someone that teams were really calling about. According to Jerry, they were working on 4 trades, to potentially move back. And the fourth one, the last one, was from the Lions, who called as they were on the clock. So the Cowboys on the clock, talking to 3 other teams. All of a sudden, here comes the Lions saying, hey, we really, really want to go get Terrion Arnold. We'll give you a 3rd-round pick. So that was a way for the Cowboys not to move too far back, and get another really high day 3 pick or high 3rd-round pick. So basically, at the same press conference room that on Tuesday, the Cowboys front office was questioned and drilled into, and they were defensive, and there was a weird aura to it, they were absolutely giddy tonight, Joey, near midnight. Maybe it was a little bit of like, hey, we're exhausted, kind of exhaustion high to it. Mike McCarthy was cracking jokes to a point where it was funny because he cracked a joke and he's like, I don't even know why I said that. And Stephen Jones had a cup, and I wrote about this on Lone Star Live. He had a cup, and he's like, you've been drinking out of my cup? And basically the aura had all changed. I think this went pretty much exactly to a T of what they wanted.
That's honestly very interesting that you say that about the interview, because the fact that you can kind of catch on to the different vibes and how it switched from earlier in this week, when obviously coming into this draft, the whole premise, and I mean, still the over or underlying or overwhelming premise, you could say, of this offseason is, what the hell does all in even mean for the Cowboys?
Yeah.
And that didn't exactly get answered at that press conference. And now, obviously, it's not like Tyler Guyton and a 3rd-round pick means they're all in. But I did like your take that you mentioned on Twitter with the trade backs, and how if they just kind of gather multiple mid-round picks, because obviously, what is it now? They have the 2nd-round pick and then 2/3, and then that big gap until round 5. It's like a 90-something pick gap. Yeah, I honestly think there's just so many little needs, like running back, defensive tackle, linebacker. I don't think safety's a huge need, but maybe wide receiver. There's so many just little needs that they can fill in this draft. And not saying that they're all going to hit and they're all going to be great, but I do think that would probably go a longer way than just drafting 1 or 2 studs or trying to trade up and get that one guy.
No, and I think you bring up a really good point in, obviously, judging this draft class is years away. You don't judge a draft class on night 1. You judge the moves made and the value, but ultimately you want to judge performance-wise. That's going to come later. But one thing to consider about the Dallas Cowboys, and maybe tonight, just maybe that aura rubbed off of me and there's just a little bit of positivity objectively. But one thing about the Dallas Cowboys of late, 1, they've drafted well, and specifically, they've drafted offensive linemen in the 1st round very well. Obviously, you go back to Tyler Smith in 2022. To go back to Tyron Smith in 2011. Travis Frederick was a very good offensive lineman for a while for them. Zach Martin, if you look at his resume, it's insane. Nearly an all-pro season every single season he's been in the NFL, which is wild. Long story short, if there's one thing the Dallas Cowboys are good at, it's drafting offensive linemen in the 1st round. And they were able to ultimately get a guy that has a very high ceiling. And the wording I kind of use is a high ceiling and the mentality to go chase it. That's one of their big takeaways. And honestly, sometimes that can be a little cliche with draft prospects, is oh, hey, they got the right mentality. They're nasty offensive linemen. But even hearing Tyler Guyton talk in the 8 to 10 minute, not even, probably 5-minute press conference call that we had with him after the draft, you heard a guy that was really excited. And excited, in my opinion, about the right things. One thing he was really excited about was the fact that he grew up a Dallas Cowboys fan. He's from Manor, Texas, so not too far from Dallas ultimately, probably 3 hours or so. So grew up a Cowboys fan. Ironically, the guy he grew up watching was Tyron Smith. That was his favorite offensive lineman to watch. Now he gets a chance to replace him. And there's some similarities. Tyron Smith, like Tyler Guyton, was a right tackle at USC, moved to left tackle. Mike McCarthy, by the way, had an excellent quote tonight. He was asked about the difficulty between moving to right tackle, even though, by the way, Tyler Guyton played for a left-handed quarterback, so that was a blindside protection thing. But the difficulty from moving right to left, and he said that former Packers offensive lineman Josh Sidden once told him, it's kind of like wiping your ass with the opposite hand. And it's a little difficult. It's not ideal, but you kind of can get it done, and then maybe you get more comfortable with it. I thought that was just kind of, again, going to the theme of the night, that it was like a moment of respite from just the all-in pressure and all that stuff, that it was more just kind of funny and comical today. That was a quote that was kind of in line with that too. So Tyler Guyton's not only excited about that too, he's got that ability. He was also said that he was so thrilled the fact that he's going to play next to Tyler Smith. He called Tyler Smith a dog. He said Tyler Smith is nasty and that he hopes to piggyback off that too, and that he sees a lot of that in him as well. And I think that that's kind of enough to get Cowboys fans excited about the potential of Tyler Guyton on night one.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
So in these draft evaluations, I am by no means a scout or have this expertise, especially with offensive linemen and offensive tackles. But from what the expert scouts are saying, it sounds like Tyler Guyton, compared to the other kind of higher tier offensive tackles in this class, is a little bit more of a project and just more of a raw tackle prospect. Do you think that will affect him playing right away? Do you think he will be the day one left tackle starter? Do you think that might take time and he has to develop, and maybe they bring someone in as that kind of in-between piece and give Guyton, maybe if it's just a few weeks into the season, however long it might be for him to develop those skills?
Oh, I'm going to take a page out of Mike McCarthy's book, what he said tonight when asked about Tyler Guyton's run blocking ability. He said, hey, we haven't even gotten through rookie orientation yet. Obviously, he was kind of joking, and he talked about his run blocking ability. And I'm joking here, too. I think that is the big question mark about Tyler Guyton moving into the next stage of the Cowboys offseason. Can he step in day one and be the starting left tackle and do it pretty well? Because back to our all-in mantra that we've heard and talked about, for months now, if you're going all in with a rookie offensive tackle, that means that they can't be a turnstile at left tackle. There's a lot of good pass rushers in the NFC East. Cowboys are going to play the Niners again. They go to Pittsburgh, so hello, TJ Watt. He's got to be able. There's a threshold he's got to be able to reach in order to start. So I think that's the big question. Can he? They do have some other options as of right now. They got Awesome Richards. They got Matt Waletzko. They got Josh Ball, guys that were drafted but have not developed into playing yet. And I think Danny's going to cringe when he hears this. But I think Chuma Edoga is a guy that can hold over a spot until someone else comes in and takes it from him. To be honest with you, and I know Cowboys fans hate that too. So sorry, guys, if you're listening to this, and that makes you cringe as well. I apologize, but at the end of the day, that's someone who can step in and do the job, in my opinion. I'm not saying do a great job, but I think he's proven that he can step in and do a job for the Cowboys. So that's kind of my take on that. Any last thoughts on just the Tyler Guyton pick? Jerry Jones called it a sexy offensive line pick at least 3 times tonight. So again, just telling you about how wild this kind of first night press conference was. Any other thoughts on Tyler Guyton, Joey?
No, my one thought that's kind of a question, so to speak, is how this shapes the rest of their draft and specifically day 2 with their, 3 picks that they have.
Yeah.
And obviously an offensive tackle was kind of the consensus of what everyone thought the Cowboys were going to do, but now they did it. So what does that mean going forward in terms of addressing need? I'd say the next 3 most likely picks / needs for the Cowboys would be what? Running back, linebacker, and then defensive tackle. Would you agree with that?
And probably center.
Center. Yep.
So, but it's interesting, and I'm glad that was a good segue, Joey, because I wanted to talk next about day 2 picks. Day 2 players still on the board, and there's still some good ones. I think defensive line is something that they still need to address, but I think they can address that kind of a run blocking or run stuffing defensive lineman maybe later. Unless, like, hypothetically, a guy like Johnny Newton fell to him, it's like, okay, maybe that's too hard to pass up. But the next position the next 2 positions they have to target, in my opinion, are center and running back. Center, running back, and linebacker, the next 3 picks. That's where I think they kind of have to go. If there's a wide receiver they really like that kind of fell to them, like maybe as a third wide receiver, to go and replace Michael Gallup. But, and I've reported this, sources have indicated for a while, and Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones did not make any deception plays about it. They love Jonathan Brooks, Texas running back Jonathan Brooks. They might love him more than any prospect that they've talked with in a long time. Jerry Jones said tonight, when asked about Jonathan Brooks, by Kirk Bohls of the Austin American Statesman, just asked, "Hey, what are your thoughts on Jonathan Brooks?" Obviously working on a story about him. And Jerry goes, it was a very kind of like laughy press conference, but very seriously goes, Jonathan Brooks was the best pre-draft interview I've ever had in 30 years of doing this. Maybe there's a little recency bias there, but clearly Jerry Jones loves him. And then he kind of went jokey again, and he said, "We have him high in that Arkansas accent to kind of talk about how high he is on the board." It was so funny because, like, that was the last answer of the night. But then Will McClay, kind of being the professional and that he is, and the scout evaluator, and the kind of, he saw the moment, and he takes the mic and he goes, "Oh, by the way, we have a lot of other highly thought of players on our board that we like a lot too." Kind of just trying to quell the idea that it's a slam dunk they're going to take Jonathan Brooks, and they still might not. Joey, obviously at pick 56, someone could take it ahead of him. But one vibe I kind of get from the way this first round went, and I think actually the first trade back is a good example of it. They not only traded 24 to get 29 and 73 from the Lions, they traded a 7th round pick in 2025. The reason being, they're in line to get 4 compensation picks next year. So that's kind of already picks in the pot, I guess you could say, that they can use to trade this year. Part of me wonders if they would trade up to get Jonathan Brooks.
Well, I wanted to add off of what you were just saying. It sounds like Jerry Jones just did 101 of what you're not supposed to do. And I get, like, we always judge GMs and coaches and executives and whatever for kind of doing the coach speak, but it's completely just like, it's a leverage thing. Like you don't want to show your hand. Like, if he's saying like high, another team's going to see that and be like, "Oh, well, I mean, we kind of like Jonathan Brooks. We know the Cowboys are picking here. We got to go in front of them and make sure this doesn't happen." Or a team can call and be like, "Hey, we're picking Jonathan Brooks. Do you want to trade up with us?" And they know how highly they like him, and they can just charge more draft picks. So interesting by Jerry to say that. I'm kind of surprised by that.
But Joey, this is the same guy that literally showed their draft board a couple years ago in a press conference. Like, and I think it was after the draft, but he literally, the draft board is supposed to be the most Fort Knox thing in a pre-draft process. This is like back of the Declaration of Independence, hidden in hidden ink, that you need lemon juice and heat to reveal what there actually is on it. And Jerry's like, "Yo, here it is. This is what we were thinking." So it's getting to the point where you might know better than me. I wonder what the betting odds are Jonathan Brooks tomorrow. But a couple other prospects if there's other guys in your mind, let me know. Jonathan Brooks, obviously, maybe a guy like Trey Benson or Bucky Irving, other running backs should be considered potentially. Center wise, Zach Frazier, Jackson Powers Johnson still on the board. I think the Cowboys like Frazier too. So I think that's a guy maybe they can go after. Linebacker, Edgerrin Cooper just feels like a Cowboy. Just, another Texas guy, a guy that's an absolute speeding bullet. The Cowboys are going to go to a more linebacker-friendly defense this year. They probably ran nickel and dime more than anyone in the league by the end of it last year, with their one linebacker sometimes being a guy in Marquise Bell, who's now a safety. It goes to show what they need. So I would expect them to kind of get a linebacker at least at some point in the draft. Is there any other prospects in date that kind of lingering over from round one where you're like, oh man, like that could be a guy that could maybe fall to the Cowboys at 56?
Well, I'll abstain from the obvious answer that I might say, just to bolster that.
You think? By the way,
no, I'm not gonna. He shall not be named. We won't.
What do you mean he shall not be named? Hold on. Ricky Pearsall went before your boy Ladd McConkey. Just FYI.
Hey, I'm aware. I saw that. That doesn't mean Ricky Pearsall is gonna have a better NFL career, or Xavier Legette, or AD Mitchell fell, which is surprising. It seemed like he had a lot of draft stock into going into the first round, but the board falls weird ways sometimes. I would say I agree with you. Johnny Newton is like the big one, is if he falls, because he's just, I think, perfect for what the Cowboys would be doing on the defensive line and lining up with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and everyone down there. But I guess that's like really the only one that trickled in that I'd say they like could maybe make a move for. But I also don't think they should make a move to trade up. Like I said in my later point, I am still always interested in Tavondre Sweat, especially now because of the DWI and what that does to his draft stock. Like if they could get him in the 4th round, that would be very interesting. But who knows? And it just seems perfect with the Cowboys because they're the kings of second chances and people who have done stuff like that before the draft and being like, hey, like we're willing to give you a chance. But other than that, I would say I'm personally, as much as they love Jonathan Brooks and whatever, and maybe he's amazing for them and he's the bell cow for like 6-7 years, whatever. But I'm just not a person that thinks running back should be drafted that high. I think they should draft, like if it's an interior offensive lineman like a Zach Frazier or JPJ, who I don't think will be there, either of them at 56, but linebacker, Junior Colson on top of Peyton Wilson, the two guys that kind of seem to be the consensus after Edgerrin Cooper. I'd say those are the names that feel the most like the best for their needs currently.
Yeah, I think the guy I'm kind of watching tomorrow actually is AD Mitchell, to be honest. Not for the Cowboys specifically, but the fact he didn't go in round one kind of blew my mind a little bit. It obviously was possible, but he could. I wonder how far he could flow. There was the report from Bob McGinn about his blood sugar levels, and how like that, affected his attitude, and to be honest with you, that's something that I don't really put a lot of stock in, but you start to wonder sometimes where it's like, if a guy does fall, maybe other people put stock in it. I don't know. I think he's a really talented player. And shoot, if he was there at 56 and the Cowboys took him, I'd have no qualms about that. As a guy to run with CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. All right, Joey, let's talk. Before we end this, let's talk overall draft thoughts.
Okay.
And how the first round went. It was a very interesting first round. My first take, dude, my jaw dropped. And I know that there were some whispers about it. My jaw hit the floor when I saw on Twitter Atlanta Falcons selecting Michael Penix. And you know who's not the only, or I'm not the only one. You know who else probably his jaw hit the floor, even though he had a little bit of a heads up? Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I'd say his jaw hit the floor, and then I can't even fathom Kirk Cousins signing this deal, feeling on top of the world, going back to the city where his wife's from, where they go every summer. Perfect situation, young team, promising players around him. They just need to add a defensive edge rusher. They've been really, really bad in terms of getting sacks for a while. They haven't had that premier edge rusher, and they could have gone Byron Murphy if they wanted to get a little weird in interior, but they had Dallas Turner or Laitu Latu. And they go with this backup instead who might not play for 4 years. It's a mind-boggling choice. Did you see the video, by the way, of Terry Fontenot, the GM, talking to Arthur Blank, and it kind of looked like he was like explaining things to him, or like was trying to.
No, I didn't see it. You're gonna have to send that to me after this.
It's a speculative video because they could have been talking about anything. You couldn't hear the audio. You just kind of saw his body language and gestures and everything like that. But it looked like he was explaining something to him, which is just funny because of that pick. And there seems to be a lot of explaining to do after that draft pick.
Terry Fontenot definitely had a Post-it note that he wrote on Thursday morning while he was eating breakfast. He wrote it, he crumpled it up, he put it in his pocket. And then when he made the pick of Michael Penix, he drops the Post-it note on the table. And Arthur Blank opens it up. And what does it read? Michael Penix, no matter what. That he had pulled a Sonny Weaver Jr. But it feels like that because it makes no sense. And like, maybe years from now we look back and it's like, okay, this was the Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love situation. After 3 years, they were able to trade Kirk Cousins for a first-round pick to some QB-needy team, get the contract off the books, easy transition for Michael Penix to come in, no pressure. But Michael Penix, by the way, also is not the 21-year-old like Trey Lance project that needs a lot of time to develop. This is a guy that's played a lot of football. I think he's 24. Him and Bo Nix we're both old in terms of college football quarterbacks. The fact that you willingly disregard the fact that you signed a quarterback to come in and raise your guys' team now, and then you also build for the future. Joey, I have this take about football teams, NFL teams, probably now college football teams with roster building. It's this simple. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't build for the future and compete for a Super Bowl championship side by side, in my opinion. I know people try, and there are ways to kind of get around it, but you just can't have your cake and eat it too. And I think that they ate a lot of cake, and they're trying to have that as well.
You might be right. I mean, the question I was going to ask you, like, how much do you have to like someone at quarterback specifically to draft them 8th overall after just signing someone to one of the richest deals in NFL history in terms of average annual value?
Dude,
how much do they like Michael Penix? They must love Michael Penix. They must make Jerry Jones's love for Jonathan Brooks look like puppy love.
You beat me to it. I was going to say that Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot are high on Michael Penix. But it's mind-blowing, dude. Like, the crazy thing about that's like that is like you're dating, you just proposed to a girl, right? And she's, thinks she's got the world. And then you go and tell her, oh, by the way, I'm going to propose to this other girl, but she's going to be my girlfriend at this side thing. And she's not going to be the girl I'm actually going to marry. But 3 years from now, I'm going to marry her, by the way. It makes no sense. And it's like, if you fell in love that much with this guy, honestly, the way quarterbacks in first rounds go right now, you might have been able to trade a 5th round pick for him 2 years from now. Like, what if Michael Penix went to Vegas, right, at 13, and he struggles, it's bad, it's not going well, Antonio Pierce gets fired, 2 years from now, they're like, shoot, there's this one quarter where the number one pick, quarterback's high, the next Caleb Williams is here, let's trade Michael Penix to Atlanta for a 5th round pick.
See, the counter argument to that is, if they like him this much to take him 8th overall in this circumstance, they don't think he'll ever play bad. If they think there's even the slight chance that he'll be a bad quarterback, then that's crazy. They have to be so sure of themselves in their evaluation and of Michael Penix that it's going to work out and it's going to be great for this to happen.
But then that's just temptation getting the most of you, and I think it could be the thing that ultimately does Terry Fontenot in, because you can't guarantee that a quarterback is going to be good. You can't guarantee that any of these players are going to be good, let alone, hey, a couple years from now when it's time to take over for Kirk Cousins. Like this succession plan is just not. Also, I will say this: I'm so glad that like there are things we can actually talk about now that happened, rather than like speculation about what could happen. Like Cowboys specific, they traded back and they got an offensive tackle to replace Tyron Smith. That's something we can now work with for a while, and they got some picks we'll get more resolution on later. Now we can talk about batshit crazy stuff like Atlanta drafting Michael Penix 8th overall. Blows my mind.
The other one I want to bring up also, I don't know if you saw the Schefter tweet after Bo Nix was drafted to the Denver Broncos, and it was talking about Sean Payton, and in 2017, how they had the 11th overall pick, which they picked Marshawn Lattimore, but they were going to pick Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Because at the time, Sean Payton was like, this is the best quarterback prospect I've ever seen, whatever, which is a little weird. Like, why wouldn't you trade up for him a little more if you're the Saints at 11th overall and you think he's that good? But regardless, the Chiefs jumped them knowing that the Saints would have interest and picked Mahomes. But the thing is, now Schefter reported that he feels just as highly about as he did about Patrick Mahomes as he does now about Bo Nix. He's almost comparing the two, which is just like silly to me. Like, sure, Bo Nix can be good, and I think he can definitely have some success with Sean Payton and what he likes to do. But comparing him to Patrick Mahomes is wild.
It's really wild, and this is coming from a guy who is probably the president of the Bo Nix can't throw the ball deep narrative committee, because I had someone tweet at me too, like Bo Nix can't throw the deep ball, go watch the tape. And I literally quote tweeted it with like this 70-yard rope that Bo Nix threw into contested coverage. And he's like, well, go look at the numbers, do some research. And I'm like, okay, do you know who had a better accuracy? He had more throws 10 yards plus than Jaden Daniels did this past season, and had better accuracy than I think everyone except Michael Penix of the elite quarterback. So long story short, I'm a big Bo Nix fan. Calling him the next Patrick Mahomes is wild, but it also gets me to thinking. You brought up a good point. If you like Sean Payton, if you like a quarterback and you think that they're incredible, go take them, right? He did the same thing tonight. It wasn't a guarantee that Bo Nix has fallen to them at 12.
This one, okay, that's where I'll push back a little. This one I think was a little more of a guarantee. It didn't seem like the Raiders had any interest in him at 13. You knew they must have known that the Vikings were going to take JJ. I mean, after Penix getting drafted, they were just like, wow. So I guess there was that slight fear of the Raiders, but I don't know. I don't think things were as hot with Bo Nix. Like, it felt like a lot of people were saying, like, if Bo Nix doesn't get drafted by the Denver Broncos, there's a chance he doesn't get drafted in the first round.
Slight pushback to that. No one knew the Chiefs were trading it for Mahomes except his agent and the Chiefs, remember?
Yeah.
So that was a shock too. So my point being, Sean, in my opinion, you should have learned from your lesson. If you like a quarterback, especially when your QB room right now is Ben DiNucci, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson, if you like a guy, especially the guy who ultimately was the final quarterback of the first round, go get him. Just a point there. Any other picks that really stood out to you that you really liked? I think Byron Murphy to Seattle feels right. He said that he has a Marshawn Lynch mentality as a defensive tackle, and now he gets to play in the home of the 12th man where Marshawn Lynch thrived. That felt good. Any other ones that stuck out to you?
This one wasn't surprising. It seemed like it was basically the consensus for a while, but adding Rome Odunze to the Bears was, in my opinion, an awesome pick just because he is so well set up for success. And obviously at the end of the day, like, a quarterback is going to, like, they kind of have that it factor, you know, that makes them, that separates them. But I think it doesn't go. It's not acknowledged enough, like how much a good situation is like so important for like a young quarterback to have success and get off on the right foot, aka Bryce Young, aka CJ Stroud. Not saying CJ Stroud last year had the best weapons around him, but they weren't bad weapons. And Bobby Slowick is clearly a great offensive mind. So I think Caleb Williams is set up in a pretty solid spot with those three wide receivers and that offense. And we'll see what Matt Eberflus and the guys can do for him. But it seems like he's going to have a very successful start to his career.
Is there a better receiver trio than Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze?
I don't think so. Honestly,
maybe depending on the Texans with Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell is really good. The Niners now, and this is the interesting one, to see if they actually keep all three of these guys.
No way.
But Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and Ricky Pearsall is a very interesting trio as well. They also have Cole Kmet, and then they signed what's his name, running back DeAndre Swift. They're I don't know if there's any excuses for Caleb Williams not to step in and do well. To be honest,
I agree.
All right, let's do a quick rundown too of the NFC East because that's relevant to the Cowboys. The Commanders, Joey, have a new quarterback, a new sheriff in town, and his name is Jaden Daniels, number 2 overall pick, the Heisman Trophy winner, going from LSU to DC. I like that a lot for them. I'm very intrigued to just see what they do with that. The Giants picking 6th, they avoided the temptation to take a quarterback themselves. It seemed like they had done their homework. It seemed like they were flirting. And at the end of the day, they didn't let any love affair with the quarterback make them pull an Atlanta Falcons. And they drafted someone to help Daniel Jones rather than replace him in Malik Neighbors, who might be the best playmaker in the draft when it's all said and done. And then the Eagles, I thought this was a sneaky, really good draft for them because, speaking of temptation, there were whispers that they were going to trade up to go get a corner.
It was, sorry to cut you off, it was more than whispers. Like, it was full-blown, like, the Eagles are really trying to trade up right now.
And
keep going.
Yeah, and ironically, like everyone said for Terry and Arnold, right? Well, they sit back at 22, and they get their choice of the top corner in the draft because that's how the draft fell. And they take Toledo's Quinyon Mitchell, who, to be honest with you, I always thought was the top corner in the draft. I mean, the Toledo playmaking or, play level is a little bit of a question. But then he went out and balled at the Senior Bowl. And I was listening to Michael Lombardi actually talk about like what they used to do with the Raiders. And he said that Al Davis, and, I guess this is for better or worse, but Al Davis, just his favorite part of the draft process was the Senior Bowl because that was the competition between the best of the best. You can't hide from the Senior Bowl in terms of your competition level. You can maybe do that against other, I think it's MAC competition that Toledo has. Can't do that at the Senior Bowl. So I think that they were able to sit back, not lose any of their picks, and still get the top corner in the draft. Very impressive.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the most interesting pick, while I think that was good on them for staying and kind of letting the board play out because of that huge offensive player run in the beginning of the draft. But the Giants there, good on them. I mean, if JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, or Bo Nix end up being good, they're going to get so much crap for it, which is just hilarious because it's the New York Giants franchise and they're just always in shambles. But at the same time, it seems like Malik Neighbors is very well, highly thought of, obviously very speedy, dynamic, shifty, twitchy, and Daniel Jones might not be the long-term option, but I don't think they're going to be awesome again next year. I think they're going to probably have a top 12 or so pick, and they'll have another shot at a quarterback, and maybe they'll like him more. And they could have – I really do think they could have – I mean, obviously they could have picked one of those three, but they had their eyes on May, according to reports. And, I mean, going back to 6, I don't think the Patriots would have been devastated with that if they got the right package and stuff around them. But obviously May wasn't worth that for them. So – good on them. They don't quarterback. You don't need to just kind of rush it if you're not fully confident. And I think that's exactly what they did.
All right. 2 more teams I want to just highlight really quick that I thought had really good drafts. One of them for similar reasons actually to the Eagles. And that was the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars were able to trade back, still get Brian Thomas, and so get some more picks. And I thought the interesting thing, I think it was Schefter or Rapshi, one of them, reported that they were in deep discussions with the 49ers for IU, I think specifically. So it just the trade compensation did not even out. At the end of the day, they do what they're comfortable with. They go back and they still get a guy who I think has the potential, in my opinion, to be honest with you, has the high level potential to be the best receiver in this draft if everything worked out. I love Brian Thomas. I don't think that would end up being the case, but we also look back sometimes and say, hey, that one receiver, Justin Jefferson, wasn't looked at, as the top receiver in that class, and look what happened to him. So I think he was fantastic. I think also Minnesota moving the draft like they did, they traded up one and then they traded up again to go get Dallas Turner. So they got JJ McCarthy and Dallas Turner. I think Dallas Turner at Minnesota is a fantastic pickup. It just feels very Viking-like to get an edge rusher from Alabama who can get after the quarterback like he can. That was impressive to me. Anything else stuck out to you?
Well, I just want to add on to the Vikings thing. That could be the Vikings version of what the Texans did last year in getting themselves their quarterback and edge rusher of the future, obviously the most important positions on each side of the ball. It could be a really good thing for Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings. Maybe not. Obviously, they weren't the second and third overall picks. They weren't two of the premier players. I mean, Dallas Turner was one of the premier edge rushers, but McCarthy wasn't one of those top three quarterbacks, clearly. But other than that, no, I got nothing to add.
Well, Joey, I think that was a very fun night one. I'm really excited for day two and day three ultimately, but day two also has the feel of kind of day one a little bit because it kind of feels like a redo of round one almost a little bit in terms of like production value. So still a lot of great picks to be had, a lot of news to happen. Stick with Lone Star Live as we present all Cowboys news, analysis, and information. We have running trackers online. We have a subtext campaign where you can join and you'll get text updates directly from me, where you can also text back with your thoughts. That's fun. I'll send photos of Tyler Guyton tomorrow when he comes to the facility via that subtext. You should check it out. And as always, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast because we're trying to have me run a Taco Bell mile. That's the most important thing about all this. Joey, thanks. Joey, by the way, just a quick thank you to Joey. Joey, is it 2 a.m. now? East Coast time?
Yeah, 2:07.
It's 2:07 on the East Coast. Joey is recording this with me. I'm in the car outside the Star in Cowboys HQ, and I'll be back tomorrow. So, as always, listen, thank you again, and that's another episode of How About That Podcast.
Thanks for listening to How About That Podcast.